Our Bucks Vote 101 series continues with a conversation centered around some of the obstacles people face when trying to vote, whether it's obstacles that are put in place by society or many times the law. We're going to break it all down. The theme for today's session is voter suppression, what it means, and then some solutions as we try to overcome it. We have a very special guest joining us today to break it all down, but before she joins us, we have a cameo by someone you all may recognize.
Well, it don't matter if you like any candidate or not. You need to go vote for somebody. Figure out what candidate you like and go vote. Do your research on who's best for you and your family. Sometimes what's best just for you isn't best for your family. So figure out what's best for you as a whole. And it's more important than ever now. Like you said, there was times back then that we didn't get this freedom. We have people, our ancestors and things fought for this freedom. Our world has fought for this freedom, so take advantage of it. Make your word and your vote mean something and get out there and do it. Especially women today. We're starting to see more powerful women come out, and it's been amazing so far to see all these women, especially women of color, to get out and voice their opinions and to be leaders and to be a focal point in this world. And it's so phenomenal to see our Black queens doing what they do best. But like I said, it's important. It means something. At the end of the day, if you don't, you can't complain about it.
We appreciate George Hill sharing his thoughts, and it's the perfect way to preface our conversation around voter suppression. One of the many reasons why exercising your right to vote is so vital. And I'm so excited that we have Molly McGrath from the ACLU to enlighten us on, one, what voter suppression is, but then we also want to provide some action items for people. Let's start with the educational piece, though. How would you define voter suppression?
Voter suppression can take a lot of forms. And a lot of times we think of traditional laws on the books as voter suppression. So those can be photo ID laws, cuts to early voting, restrictions on voter registration, all of these types of unnecessary obstacles to the ballot box. But voter suppression manifests in other ways, and this can be through discouragement, through discouraging people to vote by telling them that their vote doesn't matter, by trying to get people to lose faith in our democracy, in the power of our vote. And this is what we're hearing a lot of right now. It's this voter suppression of trying to get folks to lose faith in the value of the vote so that they don't show up. And we have to remember that the power of the vote is so valuable, and that's why they come after it, whether it's through official laws on the books or through trying to downplay the power of it. I mean, if it weren't so powerful, then why are they passing all these laws to make it so hard? So we all need to stand up and vote in spite of these attacks that we see.
And a lot of times it is questioning our faith in the system of voting too. So not just the power of our vote, but like, does your vote actually count? Will it actually get through and be counted? So I appreciate that definition there. Voter suppression isn't just now, though. I mean, this has some history. What are some examples of how voter suppression was in place? Let's talk about the 60s and even maybe before that.
You're right. It's true. Our nation has a really ugly history with voter suppression, and make no mistake that these laws are rooted in racism and particularly targeted toward Black voters, towards voters of color. I mean, if we look back even to, our country's history and founding and who could vote, it was white men who owned land. So it started with restricted and only that privilege to rich white men. So it wasn't until the end of slavery and Reconstruction, the 14th and 15th Amendment, that the Constitution, amending the Constitution, that Black men could get the right to vote. And it started to work. So Black men registered to vote. Black men were elected to office in the South. There was power there. And there was a reaction then. And so started Jim Crow laws to restrict the right to vote, poll taxes, needing to pay money to vote, literacy tests, the horrific intimidation tactics led by groups like the KKK. And those suppressive tactics all had the goal to deter people from voting, and they worked. Once these started in a place like Mississippi, registration from Black men went from 90% to 6% in 1892.
And you talked about a lot of the laws that were in place to prevent Black and brown communities, even people with disabilities, students, the elderly, from voting. But now let's shift to some of the societal burdens. What are you seeing? How are those in place right now? Why do you think those societal burdens are affecting the communities we just talked about?
We've definitely seen a modern wave of voter suppression. Since 2010, at least 25 states have passed laws making it harder to vote. And that can be through voter purges, through ID laws, cuts to early vote, restrictions on voter registration, and even restrictions on who can register voters. So some states now, even in the middle of a pandemic, aren't letting everybody vote by mail and making it harder for people to return their ballots. In 2013, too, we also had a big modern shift, and this was in a Supreme Court case called Shelby versus Holder. And this case was all about the Voting Rights Act. And the Voting Rights Act is a sweeping piece of federal legislation that was signed in 1965. And what the Supreme Court did was really gutted a main part of this act. Another reason we're seeing this new wave of modern day voter suppression is because of a Supreme Court decision called Shelby versus Holder. And this decision looked at the Voting Rights Act, a sweeping piece of legislation that was passed and signed in 1965 and in place ever since then, and signed by both Democratic and Republican presidents throughout. And what the Supreme Court said in this case is it took away the part that required places with a history of racial discrimination to check with the federal government before they changed their voting laws. Because essentially we knew that places enacted poll taxes, enacted literacy tests, enacted all of these laws to deter and discriminate against people of color from voting. So that legislation said, hey, no way, you have to check with the federal government before you're going to pass another voting law, because you can't be trusted to do this in a way that's not going to discriminate racially. And what the Supreme Court said was, actually, we don't need to do that check anymore. That's not necessary anymore in this era. And so without that check now, we saw a whole new wave of laws restricting the right to vote in places that were otherwise, covered by the Voting Rights Act and required to check with the federal government.
And we've gotten into the problem. So what's the solution? What can you, what can they do about this to overcome voter suppression?
We can do a lot. And this is why we fight, because we see who's impacted by these laws. So at the federal level, we can pass laws to restore the Voting Rights Act. There's a law that passed through the House last year, the Voting Rights Restoration Act. And this would put these states in check again, put these places in check again before they pass these laws that would restrict the right to vote. So we'll keep fighting until this is passed through both chambers and enacted into law. And it's important to remember that a lot of our voting laws are decided at the state level through our state houses. So pay attention to what's happening with our state representatives, who's representing us in the Capitol. When they make these laws, they can restrict the right to vote, but we can also move forward. And we're seeing some movement forward across the country as well to expand the right to vote. We all have to vote. If you haven't already, make your plan today. If you haven't requested your ballot, if you want to vote by mail, request your ballot today. Return your ballot today if you haven't already. If you've decided that voting in person is going to work best for you, vote early. Whatever you're going to do, you need to vote, and you need to make your plan to do it today and do it early.
I appreciate those action items because it's so easy for people to get fired up when they feel like there's tangible things that they can do. You mentioned the word fighting, and we're going to continue to fight. And I know that's what the ACLU does. What are the ways in which you all are doing that right now?
Just like kind of the country made a lot of quick transitions with COVID, so did a lot of our work at the ACLU. And we quickly transitioned to make sure that our right to vote was protected in the middle of a pandemic, and to make sure that no one had to choose between their health and the right to vote. So to make sure that as many people across the country who wanted to vote by mail had the ability to vote by mail, and to make sure that those who want to vote in person had adequate in-person opportunities, expansions on early voting. And in doing this, we filed something like 24 different lawsuits related to voting and the right to vote during a pandemic. And we also ran and led advocacy campaigns across the country, including in Florida, Georgia, Nevada, Delaware. And now, really, though, our focus is to make sure that everyone knows what options to vote are available to them, that everybody makes their plan to vote, that everybody makes a plan to vote early and votes a ballot that is counted. So we really think that this is an all hands on deck moment. One, that everybody makes their own plan, and two, that we are talking to our friends, talking to our family, making sure that everybody is ready to vote, and also activating our volunteers. You can join us at peoplepower.org, but this is not just a job for, the ACLU in court. This is really a job for every single one of us right now. And we all have the power to steer the course of this election.
So Molly, now I'm giving you the chance. It's the last pitch you have as we continue to empower people here to vote. George touched on it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Knowing that it's been an uphill battle for so many people to cast their ballot over the years, why is it important, if you are able and eligible, to exercise your right to vote?
At the most fundamental level, our right to vote is precious. It's this possession that we all have, and it is a way to be heard. It's an essential tool for social change. It's not the only tool that we have, but it is one that we absolutely have to use to create an America that protects everyone's rights. So voting is a right, but in many ways, it is also an obligation for us to show up for injustice and to show up for others. This country is worth fighting for, and we're going to vote like it.
Molly, I appreciate your time and expertise. Your passion comes through the screen. So thank you so much. To everyone else, I leave you with two things: vote and go Bucks.